Session is being recorded. All right. Once more, welcome everybody. Good evening. As you know, tomorrow it is going to snow. Maybe we are going to get a break from the global warming. Last year we barely had snow. This year we already had some serious snow. In any event, let's get back to our class. Today, I'm going to essentially outline the exam. If you have any special questions, I'm going to begin by asking you if anybody has any special questions. Special questions? Right? Hearing none. I'm going to outline what the exam is going to look like. I'm going to essentially use an example. And so our meeting today is not going to be a long one. And before I do that, let me just lay a little foundation about course. And I believe by doing the readings from the very first day and the very first week, we'd have an idea. Nevertheless, it's important for me to clarify what we are doing to prepare you for the final exam. As you well know, the United States government formally declared a war on drugs in 1971 by the President Richard Nixon. And also, when President Ronald Reagan took office in 1980, he had this program, Say No to Drugs. Okay, Say No to Drugs, which means that there is a social, official government policy that is established there against the use of what we call illicit drugs, or at least narcotics, those drugs that are psychoactive. And so psychoactive meaning the drugs that affect your brain and cause people to to modify people's behavior. But policy against the use of narcotics is not a new thing in the United States. In the 1920s, for example, there was prohibition for drinking alcohol and prohibition from using narcotics that what we call the narcotics today, drugs like opium and cocaine. And these policies, were the result of social concerns, and also they observed, social, behavioral, as well as medical consequences, physical consequences on people, consequences on people's health. And this is why I say medical, observed medical outcomes for people who use drugs. But again, such policies, as a result of observed, medical and behavioral effects, did not begin in the 1920s. If you go back to the 19th century in England, there were also policies against drugs, against narcotics, opium and cocaine, and also what we call marijuana, which is called Indian hemp. That is the agricultural name for what we call marijuana. It's Indian hemp. Now, and these policies against the use of psychoactive drugs like cocaine, opium, and marijuana, again, are not limited to Western Europe or to England or to the United States, but also you see that the Chinese had a prohibition against the use of opium, which is not really cultivated in China, and fought against it. And in fact, made war. The English had to make war. The British had to make war on the Chinese in order to impose the of opium into China. Okay, so So government policy against the use of narcotics is not a new thing. It is not limited to the Western world. I mean, ironically, the Western world imposed it on China, and now the table has turned, and the Western world is fighting against the use of the importation of opium and cocaine into their country, and even marijuana is being prohibited. And so the war on drugs has been there for years. Now, admonition against the use of these psychoactive narcotics, again, is not new. Back into the ancient world, admonitions, not prohibitions, admonitions that these drugs are addictive and should be used sparingly and avoided altogether possible. Okay. And you know that medical practice 400 years ago, 500 years, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, even 1,000 years ago, it's not what it is today. I mean, if people find a painkiller, they will use it. And sometimes the consequences are attributed to the gods, to spirits, evil spirits, good spirits, you name it. So let's now get to our point. So in what the other point that I'm trying to make, not to let me not say let's get to our point. The other point I want to then emphasize is how is it that we are presenting this? First of all, we recognize that the prohibition against the use of psychoactive drugs is not new. It is not something of the present day. It's something that goes back into history. Okay, this is one. Secondly, you will see also that the difficulty in fighting against these active drugs stems from the fact that, first of all, historically it had been used. There was a time in history when they were used legitimately and when they were actually prescribed, as legitimate sources of medication. The Americans use it, for religious purposes. They also use it for economic purposes, like when they chew on the coca leaf here in the Americas. It will enable them to be able to operate in the high mountains. It will also enable them to eat less and work more. And so it was used for legitimate purposes. Okay. The issue today then is overuse, misuse of these psychoactive drugs. Now, given that we have these problems about these psychoactive drugs, the question then is, we impose sanctions on those who violate the law. And that is where we talk about the war on drugs, and this is why we call this class the war on drugs, public policy, economics, and history. And so you would see that throughout this course, you will see historical development on the war on drugs. And so we have three perspectives, three analytical perspectives on the war on drugs. And then we have three perspectives on approaches to the war on drugs. And then we also have methodologies. We have the supply side approach as a method. And also we have the demand side approach as a method. Now, depending on your analytical perspective, or depending on the analytical perspective of an individual, how we approach or the methodology that we use will differ. It's coming in. All right, so methodologies and perspectives will differ depending on the analytical approach. Okay, so what are the three main analytical approaches, which we read about in module 2? Three main analytical approaches. The first one is what is called the deviance theory, or the deviance analytical perspective. And we have the rational analytical perspective. Then we have the Marxist analytical perspective, which is called historical materialism. Okay. Now, the deviance analytical perspective simply is based on the idea that every society has norms of behavior that are accepted and sanctioned by the society based on its philosophy. And whoever then does anything or behaves in a manner that is different or antithetical to the norms, to the accepted norms, is considered a deviant. Okay. For example, many societies forbid armed robbery as a means of living, of making a living. And those who engage in armed robbery are considered to be deviants. Those who engage in what is declared to be criminal are considered to be deviants. And so those who use drugs are considered to be deviants. They are deviant because society forbids the illegal and unapproved use of narcotics. Though even somebody who is a drunkard, and drunkenness is very often prohibited in many modern societies. And so somebody who is perpetually drunk, or who is regularly drunk, not perpetually, somebody who is regularly drunk, and their drunkenness, their drunken stupor, they are not able to function, and they are considered to be deviants. Okay, and so when people who engage in those kinds of deviant behavior, are condemned, they are sanctioned if they are apprehended. And then there is the second analytical perspective is rational analytical perspective. And very often I ask students, what is rationality? Rationality is behavior that is designed and is consistent with a desired outcome. And so I remember once I was on television, and somebody in the Bronx who was frustrated about life, didn't have a job, his spouse may have left him or her, the person jumped from a roof headfirst and died. And so when the newsman came to ask neighbors what happened and why he did what he did, they explained that he was frustrated and has been having problems, paying his rent and things like that. But he said what he did was irrational. And I said, no, what he did was rational. It was rational because he wanted to die. And if he wants to die and he jumps from the roof and dies, that's irrational behavior because he was trying to solve a problem. And this was his way of solving the problem, to die. He wanted to die, so he jumped from a roof. He could have shot himself with a gun. He could have taken poison, but that is rational behavior. Now, the idea is that those who think about drug users as behaving rationally simply explain that when human beings have a problem, they try to solve the problem one way or another. Now, there are two reasons why people use drugs or use narcotics like opium and cocaine or marijuana, or even drink alcohol and get drunk. First of all, they may have frustrations in life, and one way to forget those frustrations temporarily is to use drugs. And I'll give you an example. To use drugs, to sniff cocaine, inject opium, drink, and forget their problems. And so they use drugs. But, they solve the problem. The question is, they may not solve the problem permanently, but for them, that temporary relief is acceptable. That is their approach. That's the approach, the way they're approaching their problem is, for a while, I want to forget my problems. And so I want to get over it. Okay. The other reason that people use narcotics is not really that they have these problems that they want to forget. They enjoy it, enjoy that high. And they go and drink and get a high and go and sleep. And they feel good about it. Now, the problem arises, for example, let's take a very simple one, like drinking alcohol, is to overdo it. And it is not that you don't know that overdoing it is wrong. They just indulge. And this is one of the consequences. They indulge and they overdo it. And even those who use, who inject opium of morphine, or who sniff cocaine, they want to get a high. They just want to enjoy it. It's not different from you sipping some, what do you call it? Soft drink like a Fanta or a Coke. You enjoy it. You drink it, you like the taste. It just tastes sweet. And so think about something like smoking cigarette. Cigarette is addictive. And I have asked people that smoke, why do you smoke? They say it tastes good. I said, and I once smoked a cigarette many, many years ago when I was still a teenager, which was more than 50 years ago. And I didn't feel any taste from smoke. I didn't feel any taste. It did not taste sweet. It did not taste bitter. It did not taste tangy. And so where do these people find this taste in a cigarette? But those who do get some taste out of it. And, some feel stimulated by it. So when people, take drugs, there's an enjoyment that they get out of it. The issue then becomes overuse. And when they overdo it, when they overdo it, their behavior give rise to injuries to their neighbors. And in fact, that doing it and doing things that we call, for lack of a better word, crazy, they even enjoy that part of it. So it's rational behavior. And very often it has consequences. It's not because they have some problems they want to forget. Now, how about movie stars that use drugs? Many of them don't have financial problems. Many of them have no issues getting a job in being hired in their profession. But they just love to get that high. Okay. And so they enjoy it. So it's rational. Now, the other.
Yeah. I didn't put it off.
Please, can you mute yourself? Mute yourself, please. Then the other is the historical materialism, the Marxism. And historical materialism is, based on the theory of Karl Marx. Karl Marx, and their whole idea is that any resort to drugs, psychoactive drugs, is part of an attempt by the users to relieve themselves of the frustrations of modern, of the society. Because after all, people have overused drugs. So in the present day society, the whole idea is that Karl Marx, described the progression of history and simply concluded that at any point in time that you have two groups of people in the society, the exploiting class and the exploited class. The exploited class are the masses of the people, and the exploiting class are simply those who control the instruments of production and distribution. So the working class feels alienated from the structure and the process of production and distribution, and therefore that alienation and the frustration, and also the evident exploitation of their output, their helplessness in sort of, what do you call it, redressing the exploitation of their output and their contribution. So they cannot redress in the sense that they cannot say, hey, wait a minute, I deserve more than what I am getting out of the process of production, and you know, they are powerless, and so they use drugs as a means of resolving their issue. Okay, all right. So now we have looked at analytical perspectives, and these three analytical perspectives will influence the solutions that are proposed by individuals depending on their analytical perspective, whether you Huygens theory, whether you subscribe to the rational theory or you subscribe to the theory of historical materialism. So there are three solutions that three approaches. Are based on what can be done. Okay, now you have theories of power. Okay, three theories of power. Okay, the theories of power two main theories. But let me the historical materialism. I don't even. Yeah, it's a theory of power. What is the rational approach? Okay, the rational approach to power. Okay. Not rational, sorry. Realistic. Sorry. The realistic approach to power. Okay. There's a realistic approach. There is the liberal approach, and which we call liberalism. And then, of course, there is the Marxist approach to power. Okay. Now, the realistic approach simply says that in any kind of interaction between two constituencies, and the two constituencies could be two individuals, they could be two communities, they could be two countries, the two groups of people that share the same space or compete for the same space. And so in realism, or the realistic perspective of power, that in any kind of interaction between two groups, there is always a competition for which group or which constituency will dominate the other constituency. And the whole idea of the constituency that will dominate the other constituency is to be able to control how output between two constituencies are distributed. So there's always that competition for power, for dominance. And so, and the outcome of that of any interaction between any two groups, any two constituencies, is always a zero-sum game. Okay, and so when we interact, there's always a zero-sum gain. Whatever you gain is what I have lost, and whatever I gain is what you have lost. And so there's always this constant struggle for domination. Okay. And the objective of each side is to dominate and to take from the other side. Then there is the liberal approach. Liberalism actually postulates that cooperation is better than competition. That when two groups cooperate, they can produce more than if they are in competition. And so when they cooperate, what happens then is that we have what Americans call a win-win situation. And so let us say that we are in competition and you produce 10 and I produce 7. Okay. So between us is 17. And for me to have 10, I must take your 3 and you have 7 and I have 10. Or I can take 1 from you and then you have 9 and I have 8. Okay. But it's a zero-sum game. But in liberalism feels that if we cooperate, and then that means you could produce 15 and I produce 14. So between us, now we have 29 instead of 17. And so it's much better for us to cooperate than to compete. This is the whole idea of the liberal approach to power. Now, the Marxist approach to power is that the exploiting class will never relinquish anything without a struggle. That the best way for us all as a community to live in peace and to have more between us is for the working class to overthrow the exploiting class. Once we do that, then we cooperate with each other. But under the circumstances right now, there is no such possibility until the exploiting class is overthrown in a revolution. That is, again, the theory of power from historical materialism. Okay, and so now the question then is, how do you apply any of these theories to solution of the drug issue? There is the supply side theory, and there is the demand side theory. So how do you resolve the use of drugs in a society, the use of illegal, the abuse of drugs, the use of illegal narcotics? How do you solve them? You can resolve them through a supply side approach, okay? You can resolve them through a demand side approach. And how you resolve them? The supply side simply means to discourage production. And production is not only to plant and cultivate these crops, opium and cocaine and marijuana and what have you, try to reduce their production, you are reducing supply. But supply not only addresses the planting and the cultivation and the processing, but also the transportation and delivery to the sources of demand, okay? And the demand side takes the approach that if there is no demand, then there'll be no supply, which makes a lot of sense. If nobody is going to buy a product, then those who are producing it are wasting their time. So we try to also reduce demand. And so how do these perspectives enable us, I would say, how would the perspectives that we have affect the way, the approach that we take, the methods that we use? Now, suppose you take the deviance model. If you follow the deviance model. Well, the deviance model then, what happens is that if somebody is using drugs, okay, and you want to discourage it, you disrupt supply. You disrupt supply through military action by either arresting, destroying crops, arresting the producers, interdiction of the transportation process through the use of force, because those who are producing harmful drugs are deviants. And so you take the approach that they're not supposed to produce this, and so you can destroy their crops, you can arrest them, you can interdict. I see somebody is raising their hand. Could you please ask your question? Is that Boris?
Yes.
Okay, Boris, go ahead.
I had a question. So, I mean, we're assuming that because we're destroying their crops, that people don't want this. Isn't the bigger issue that the people who do want the drugs and not the people who make it? Because if they make it, sure, you can't stop every single person. You can't, go to every single country and burn the crops, but you can the biggest thing is that people keep buying these things, right? So isn't it better for you to switch into
We are looking
find
at two approaches here. One is the supply side approach.
okay.
So we're still looking at supply side approach. If you destroy the crops and they're not available, then those who want them would not get them.
Well, I mean, you're assuming that if they, yeah, but they could also just find something else, and that other thing might
Fine
not
and
be.
good. And so if they
Oh,
find something else, you go and destroy that something else. This is the deviant model. Okay. If you destroy marijuana, if you destroy cocaine, if you destroy alcohol, if you destroy whatever, they find something else. Whatever else they find, you go and destroy it. So you're trying to eliminate supply, because if it's not there, then it's not, those who demand it will not get it. Okay. So let's talk about how the deviant theorist approach would apply the supply side approach, which is to reduce supply. Okay, we're gonna get to your point. I know where you're going, but I'm trying to, take things one at a time.
okay.
Now, those who believe, those who have the rational perspective, how do they deal with the supply side approach? Okay, remember, supply side approach is about reducing supply, or actually eliminating supplies, to make the narcotics not available. That's what it is, to make the product not available. And so the deviant theorists will say, go destroy the product. Okay. But the rational person will say, provide an incentive to the supplier so they can supply something better. And that incentive could be to pay them off so they don't produce this thing, or to show them an alternative product which will make them more income. Okay, so we're just saying what things are, not what could happen after that. Okay. So we are taking what you call the positive perspective. Positive meaning this is what is. We're not saying it is right. Okay, we're not taking the normative. Okay, the normative is what ought to be. Okay. So the rationalist will simply say, people do things for their benefit. If something is going to help me achieve my objective, then I will do it because it's helping me to achieve my objective. If I want to earn money, I go and work. If producing opium, which is going to kill 1,000 people, is a way for me to make my money and make a living, well, I'll produce it. If you want to take opium and kill yourself, that's your problem. Okay? So the rational person will produce what to enable them to make a living. So rationality then, the rational approach, the solution will be to provide alternatives. The idea, that is the way the rational person would do it. Okay. Now, when you think about then the demand side approach, which is to discourage demand, to reduce demand, what will the deviant theorists do? The deviant theorists will say, if you see anybody using this product, arrest them and punish it. Okay? The rationalists will say, educate the user and say, this thing will kill you. This thing will do you a lot of harm. If you take these drugs, you're going to be agitated and you cannot go to work. You'll not be able to go to work. You'll not be able to function at your best, and therefore you earn less income. And so please stop using it. So education becomes a means of discouraging the use. So reducing demand. And if there's no demand, then the supply is no good, as the supplier will have less to supply. And then they will go and look for other things to produce. So again, the positive thinking is to actually say what is, not what ought to be or what can happen after that. Whether it is going to work or not going to work is not our issue, but this is what is being done. This is what this particular perspective will lead to. This is the approach. Okay. All right. So now, the last thing that I'm going to do then is to pull up an exam question And let us apply some of these theories to an exam question. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. See. Screen. Okay. All right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, Professor.
Yes, Professor.
You see my screen?
Yeah, I see it.
Yes, Professor.
Yes.
Right. I just make it a little bigger. I'm not trying to, I'm not going to try to answer an exam question for you. Okay. So describe the proximate events or events that triggered the Second Opium War. Okay. Well, I mean, there were two Opium Wars. Okay? One in 1839 and the other one in 1860. The simple thing about the Opium War is that the Chinese people, the Chinese government felt that opium was, killing their people. And so they prohibited the importation of opium into China. But of course, so what happened then was that the British, who a lot of money, exporting opium to China, declared war on China because they accused them of obstructing trade. Okay, and whether that is legitimate reason or not is something, it's a whole different topic. Okay, but what happened really was that the British used to import a lot of tea from India and also textiles from India, other, exotic products from India, what I call exotic things that were not produced in England. And so the Indians, silver as something that that was, the instrument of trade way back then. And so it was draining the British treasury to trade with the Indians. And so the British people then, through the company, discovered that they could buy opium cheaply from Afghanistan. Opium poppies were grown at that time. And so they would buy the opium cheaply from Afghanistan and then sell them to the Chinese people and acquire gold. And then they use the gold to buy tea from India and go back to England. So, but then the Chinese felt that this was really not only draining their gold resources, but also killing their people. And so prohibited the exportation of opium into China, and the British declared war. Okay, so now I said to describe the proximate events. I'm not going to describe the proximate events here. You read that in your readings. But here, the question is, how can you apply the realistic theory of political power and trade to explain the reaction of the Chinese government to the sale of opium in China? I'm going to answer only that question. Okay. Now, how can you apply the realistic theory of political power to explain the reaction of the Chinese government? So in answering this kind of question, I want you first of all to describe realistic theory. I want you first to describe realistic theory. This is the approach. So in answering the question, first, describe theory. Okay. One. Two. And how their theory applies to the situation. All right. So in this case, for example, the theory is just that in any kind of interaction between two constituencies, there is always a struggle for domination. Okay? That is the theory. And so here you have the interaction between the Chinese and the British and the outside world. And so the trade, that's a kind of interaction. And the British companies want to make money, they want to make profit. The Chinese people also want to preserve their gold and also preserve their population. Now, if in this struggle for domination, the Chinese government would want to protect source of any kind of, say, war. They also want to protect their base of production, because who produces? The population, the people do the production. And so the Chinese will want a productive community. They don't want a community that's weakened by the taking of opium that incapacitates them, that debilitates them, and therefore they want to sustain the power of the state against any kind of interaction kind of domination by any outside forces. It does not make a difference whether they are looking at interaction in terms of war, or they're looking at interaction in terms of being able to produce goods to sell to other people. They want to sustain the competitive edge of their community. That is the theory and how it applies to this particular situation. Okay. And so now when they prohibit opium and the British say they are obstructing trade, they are restraining trade, the Chinese want to be able to say, well, yes, that is our law. We don't want you to sell this thing to our people. And so the realistic theory of power then is such that the British want to impose it. If they are able to impose it, they will impose it. If they're not able to impose it, they will back off. That is realistic theory of power. Again, in application of positive thinking, positive meaning what is, not what ought to be, not what is right. What is that the British have gunboats, they have firepower, and so the realistic theory is such that the British would want to impose it. And realistic theory also would lead us to conclude that the Chinese people do not want a weak population. My point. Hello?
Yeah, I hear
All
you.
right. Okay. So you can then apply this. Was the reaction of the Chinese government justified compared to the reasons given for the war on drugs against drugs in the United States? You can apply the theory there, right? Okay. So this is what I would want you to approach an exam question. First of all, describe the theory and then explain how it applies to the particular situation.
Okay.
All right. All right. Any other questions?
Not that I have.
Okay. The exam is going to be an essay question. This is an example of what the questions will look like. So, yes, go ahead.
Gonna be one question, one essay question, Professor?
No. Let me share this again. Be one essay question. example, you can see here is 1, 2, 3. See, describe the deviance analytical model of the war on drugs. Apply this model to propose a supply reduction strategy to the war on drugs. This is another question. How would you compare some of the socioeconomic consequences of opium that led to social and legislative movements in the 19th century England to similar issues in the United States? So I hope you're reading the material because they are all there. You have to describe. So you're going to have an exam with 2 or 3 parts. During our last meeting 2 days ago, I said, okay, I promise I will make the exam simpler. Instead of 3 parts, I will have only 2 parts. But each part will have A, B, and C. Okay, so you're going to be looking at something like 6 questions, and they're going to cut across everything that you would have read from the first day of this class until Tuesday night.
Okay.
Right.
Understood.
So, Professor, you're looking for one essay that answers
No.
all 6 questions?
No, you're looking at about six different questions. And each you have to write the questions into the screen. Okay, like let me pull this up again. Let us say that I'm going to paint. This will be question 1. Okay, this will be question 1. So you answer each question. Describe the proximate event or events that triggered the Second Opium War. So first of all, you're going to say when the Opium War started. What were the proximate events that led to this war? Okay. What happened? Here's a question here.
So ideally, not an essay, but an elaborate, like,
Yeah,
explanation.
just respond to the
answer
question.
Okay.
Just respond to the question. So, like I said, this is going to be like this. This could be question 1. And so you answer this question. What are the proximate events that led to the Second Opium War? How can you apply realistic theory? Was the reaction of the Chinese government justified? That is to say, the Chinese government responded. The US government century also responded. And so if you look at the Chinese government action and look at the US government action, were similar. Are they justified based on the same ideas that led the United States government to react? So this could be question 1. Then question 2 could be this question here. That question there. It could be that. You don't know. And it could be 3 parts. The first question, this question here, and another question. And they would come from everything you have read and everything you would read Tuesday.
Okay.
Actually, between now and Monday.
All right. Lastly,
From
Professor,
the beginning of this class until Monday.
how long will we have to like,
you will have 2 hours. You have 120 minutes.
okay. And what's expected, like 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs to answer
Something
each
like that.
question?
Yeah, straight cut to the chase.
So 1 paragraph each question.
Could be 1, could be 2 paragraphs. It depends on what you have to explain. If you say, for example, what were the proximate events that led to the Second Opium War? Based on what you read, what do you think were the proximate events? What do you remember?
You want us to answer that now or for the thing?
I mean, you can contribute to the conversation by saying, okay, I remember so and so, and I'll say, yes, that would be an appropriate answer. What were the proximate events that led to the Second Opium War? Now, remember that the big picture was the British wanted to insist on having the Chinese import opium. That's the big picture. So that's not the proximate event. What were the immediate events that triggered the Second Opium War?
Um,
So they're gonna read up on it.
So to answer a question like that, right? If I was to elaborate on the Arrow incident, would that, like, what I'm just trying to find out, what would, like, I know different professors grade differently. So
Yeah.
what would be suffice here? A breakdown of, like, what the treaty violations, the Arrow
Yes, that's it.
incident?
The violation of the treaty, the you know, the bribery of the officials.
And that would be okay.
Yeah, that would be okay. You know,
Okay.
something happened
um,
that violated the treaty, and the Chinese were determined to enforce, to still stop the importation of opium, and the British declared war again.
okay.
Understood.
All right. So, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Pro-
Professor, for your
Professor,
time.
before you go, the learning activities, I realized that I think there's one of them is still not available. Are you
What?
giving us time to study, or, like, I don't understand why they're not open as yet?
Yeah, one of them is still not available. I'm gonna post that tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday. I'm gonna post it tomorrow or Monday, maybe two more.
Because I realized Nixon isn't available as yet. I was just trying to, like,
Not
get the
yet. No, not yet. No.
study and
I
focus
just
on
don't
it.
want to overload you with things. So you get in one at a time.
Also, I think if you don't, you know, from my perspective, I think it would be fine for you to post them, because then we could try to get ahead and
Okay,
also use it
no
studying.
problem.
I don't know if
I'll
that's
post them
easy, but-
tomorrow. Then. I'll post
Because
them
I honestly think that not opening them is actually overloading us. Because we would then need to wait till it's available to post
Yeah.
and respond, and we could just bang it out now and focus on the final.
You'll get it tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.